We were on our way back from our game in Reno when the bus broke down. You could hear the unnatural whir of the engine even from near the back, where I sat with Amy and Rachel. I remember the way Amy looked up from her phone, brow furrowing as that ominous hiss echoed through the bus. Rachel was quiet but traded looks with Amy and I as the bus jolted violently and began to slow. "What's going on?" she asked, although I think she already knew the answer. All of us did, and the other 12 girls on the bus seemed just as concerned. I noticed our coach, Miss Evans, leaving her seat to check in with the driver. The bus slowly eased over to the side of the road, before rolling to a stop in the darkened Nevada scrublands. I could hear most of the other girls on the team whispering amongst each other. Did we just break down? What are we gonna do now? Is someone gonna pick us up? Then there were the girls who acted like this was just the funniest thing that could happen, and I had to admit that it was a little funny, by trying to spook some of the others. I noticed my friend Dolores whispering to another girl in a cryptic voice. "Looks like we're spending the whole night out here," she teased. "Hope the whisper men don't get us." "I'm serious, don't even start with that." Another girl, I think it was Kelly Stanley, snapped, and Dolores just laughed. At a glance, she didn't look like the kind of girl who had a wild streak. She had odd proportions, Coke bottle glasses, buck teeth, and stringy hair that sat a little too far back on her forehead. But, despite that, she was also one of the best players on the team, and once you got used to her bullshit, she was a pretty good friend. Most of us had heard her story about the Whispermen. She liked to break it out during sleepovers, campfires, or any other circumstance where scary stories were appropriate. I'd first heard her tell it at a middle school camping trip to Amy's backyard, after we'd gotten bored of watching old anime on her laptop, which had been her and Amy's obsession at the time. Rachel had nabbed some cigarettes and a lighter from her mother, which were supposed to be the secret highlight of our night. None of us managed to get past the first few drags of the cigarettes without hacking up a storm, so we abandoned that idea pretty quickly. But we'd kept the lighter and decided that it just wouldn't be a camping trip without a few scary stories. So, in lieu of an actual campfire, we held the lighter and pulled out the best tales we could think of while we munched on stale popcorn. Dolores' tale had been about the Whispermen, and truth be told, it wasn't actually that good. The tale of the Whispermen started with a forum post online, several years back by some guy whose car had allegedly died on the side of the road one night. He'd posted on a forum looking for help, rambling about strange, shadowy creatures that were stalking him through the dark, and then he'd vanished. Pretty standard schlock, but the story didn't seem to end there. According to a few internet sleuths, the man who'd made the post, some salesman out of Toronto, had in fact gone missing that night. He'd been on his way to a late evening meeting with a prospective client, but never arrived, never called, and was never seen again. Plus, the history of the original poster seemed to support the idea that he wasn't just some prankster. This guy had been posting for several years before his disappearance and had, for the most part, seemed completely legitimate. It would have been odd for a guy like that to post some lame creepypasta, then vanish both online and in real life, leaving behind a career, a family, a mortgage. Granted, it wasn't impossible that this was all just an elaborate hoax, and if it was, it didn't gain a hell of a lot of traction outside of some mystery YouTubers who'd reported on the case. But the traction it did gain was interesting. Over the years, various other people had shared strange stories of things they'd seen when their cars had suddenly stopped on the side of the road at night. Shadowy figures, strange animals, surreal hitchhikers. Most of them were similar to the original post about the Whispermen. It was a little odd that so many people were willing and eager to jump on such a weird bandwagon. The posts never got much traction and were, at best, treated as run-of-the-mill creepypastas that faded into obscurity among the millions of other scary stories posted online. Personally, I didn't buy it. Any of it. I'd been hearing Dolores take every opportunity to tell that story through most of middle school, just about every year of high school, and she still hadn't stopped now that we were in college. I knew she was at minimum blowing up the details. But it was fun and most people seemed to like it, so I never complained. I was of the opinion that it really was just run-of-the-mill creepypastas, but I still got a chuckle out of Dolores bringing it up, now that we were the ones who'd broken down on the side of the road. I caught Amy flashing a smile that was either amused or annoyed. It was hard to tell with her. Rachel was glancing out the window, into the darkness, before looking out at the front of the bus. Miss Evans and the bus driver were both talking quietly. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but despite their stern expressions, they didn't seem worried. I guess if push came to shove, they could probably call another bus to come pick us up or something. Sure, we were in the middle of bumfuck nowhere, but there were other cars around, right? I glanced out at the road, expecting to see headlights, although there were none. None at the moment. Someone was bound to come along this desolate stretch of land soon. Soon. I heard Miss Evans say something about road flares, and she finally got up to address us directly. "Alright team, looks like we're having a little bit of trouble with the engine right now," she said. "The driver is going out to put out some road flares and call for a repair. We may need to take a separate bus home, but it's going to take some time for it to get to us. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to stay in our seats, we're going to stay on the bus, and we're going to wait patiently. Is that clear?" "Yes, coach," came the unanimous reply. "Good. Sit tight, we'll still have you home by morning." "If the Whisper Men don't get us," Dolores teased, only to be swatted at by one of the other girls. Sarah, I think her name was. "Wake me when something happens," Amy said with a shrug. She leaned back in her chair, before not so subtly letting her head fall on Rachel's shoulder. Her thick red locks spilled over her, and I noticed a wry, cocky grin sneak across her lips. She knew exactly what she was doing, and Rachel's cheeks almost turned as red as Amy's hair. She sat there, looking down at her, seeming to dwarf poor Amy. Rachel was easily the tallest girl on the team, and she looked almost comically oversized sitting in that chair, with the regular-sized Amy nestled on her shoulder. Her long, coltish legs were positioned at odd angles, and her sandy blonde ponytail rested under Amy's head like a pillow. Looking at those two, I couldn't help but wonder how in the hell it had taken me so long to figure out that they were gay. I mean, they'd always been close ***, but right up until I saw them kissing after school last year, I hadn't actually put the pieces together. To be fair, when I'd finally worked up the courage to ask them about it, Rachel had admitted that the kissing was a new thing, so I guess they'd taken their time in figuring it out too. Technically, it wasn't something they were open about yet, but they weren't exactly hiding it either. While they cuddled, Dolores switched seats to get closer to us, grinning from ear to ear as she did. "Aw, how cute," she teased. "And look at you, all alone. How sad," Amy said, eyes still closed. Dolores just shrugged playfully. "Hey, I've got a packed schedule," she said. "Basketball, debate club, taekwondo, school. I don't really have the time." "You just say that because you're too big of an asshole to love," Amy said. "Oof, low blow." Dolores chuckled. Amy finally opened her eyes. "I'm just saying, you've got a big nose. Stick it back in your own business." "Oh, I'm gonna stuff my nose all up in your business," Dolores retorted, swaying closer dramatically before realizing how wrong what she'd said had sounded, and pausing. I could see the gears in her mind turning for a moment, before she realized that there was simply no coming back from this. Amy just burst out laughing. "Sorry, I'm taken," she said, patting Rachel's arm. "I've got my big strong girlfriend to protect me in case the Whisper Men come." Rachel meekly flexed her arm, cracking a slightly shy smile. "Super gay to the rescue," Dolores asked. "What's your power? Kissing Amy without gagging?" Amy playfully swatted at her and Dolores pulled back suddenly, cackling. "Oh, somebody's my award." She mimed a goofy, whiny nerd voice as she said, "Miss Evans, she's bullying me. You know that if you two keep f***ing around you're going to actually get in shit, right?" Rachel asked, although she still had to put a hand over her mouth to stifle her giggles. "What's she gonna do? Throw us to the Whisper Men?" Amy joked, although she and Dolores both sat back, taking the hint to tone it down. I glanced out at Miss Evans, up near the front of the bus. She stood by the window, looking out warily into the dark. There were no lights out there. Hadn't she and the driver said something about road flares? Dolores, Rachel, Amy, and I had been talking for a good long while. Why weren't there any road flares? How come there still weren't any headlights outside? No passing cars? How come we were alone? Miss Evans shone her phone's flashlight out through the windshield, before checking it uneasily. She glanced at the closed door to the bus, and seemed to freeze, as if she wasn't entirely sure of what she should be doing next. While my friends kept talking in the background, I couldn't help but watch her as she inched closer to the windows, staring at something out there. I couldn't help but wonder what. I caught myself glancing out through my own windows. All I saw was darkness, infinite, inky darkness stretching on as far as the eye could see. It almost felt oppressive. And yet, there was something else about that darkness. Something I struggled to really describe. I could have almost sworn that I saw movement in the shadows. Shapes scurrying through the darkness. Animals, maybe. Deer. Were there deer out here? I glanced over at Miss Evans again. Judging by the way she was staring out into the darkness, she must have seen something too, and apparently we weren't the only ones. There's something out there, one of the other girls said, and the moment those words left her mouth, others started looking. What is it? What's out there? I see it. What is that? Is that a coyote? No, it looks like a person. Are there people out there? There's another one. Dolores moved closer to the window, trying to catch a glimpse of the shapes in the darkness. Her eyes narrowed as she scanned the inky black, before she finally got frustrated and took out her phone. Through the window, I noticed a shape inching closer to the bus. One of the shadows. She turned on her phone's flashlight and shone it through the window. The glare reflecting off the glass made it impossible for me to see what she saw, but looking back, I can't help but wonder if that was a blessing. The moment she got a look at whatever was waiting for her on the other side of the glass, I saw her skin turn pale. She jerked away from the window, screaming as she did. Her phone dropped from her hand, clattering on the ground as she started to scream. The shape in the darkness didn't move, still staring in at us, and even though I couldn't see it clearly, I still couldn't help but feel an all too visceral fear of it. What I could make out was a simple pair of beady eyes, studying us like fish in an aquarium. The shape watched us for a few moments, before pulling back and disappearing into the darkness. Dolores kept on staring out the window, trembling slightly, mouth hanging open as if she was struggling to find a way to articulate what exactly it was that she'd seen out there. Girls, stay away from the windows. Miss Evans warned, and although that warning seemed to have come too late, I still saw several other girls moving away from the windows. They seemed to have taken the subtle cue that whatever was out there was something they neither wanted to see, or be seen by. Rachel, Amy, and I did the same, moving away from the windows. I noticed Amy's hand gripping Rachel's, as the two watched the windows uneasily. Dolores still wasn't speaking, but kept glancing into the darkness as if to make sure that whatever she saw was gone. I noticed Miss Evans trying to use her phone. She wasn't the only one, but as far as I could tell, nobody was getting a signal. We were alone out there, and that was when the silence set in. It's hard to describe exactly, but the moment we collectively seemed to realize that there was no way to call for help, I could almost sense the dread washing over the girls on that bus. I could almost feel the hope in their hearts dying, and it was hard to feel anything myself anymore. All we could do was hunker down and try to wait until morning. Only, the morning didn't come. We waited in terrified silence. We waited for hours, but the darkness didn't lift. Looking back, I honestly don't think I can describe the inescapable dread that settled over us like a thick blanket of despair. I truly don't think I have the vocabulary for it, and the words I can use don't fully encapsulate the experience. For hours, we huddled near the center of the bus watching shadows move in the darkness. Most of us tried to get some sort of signal, but there was none to get. After a while, the lights in the bus flickered out, earning a few screams from some of the girls, but that was really the only thing of note that happened during those hours. And when those lights went out, the mood around us grew all the darker. I heard Kelly sobbing near the front of the bus. I recognized her voice. "We're really going to die here, aren't we?" I heard her say. "We're really going to die here. We're not going to die here. We'll be okay," someone else promised. "It should be 10 a.m. right now." 10 a.m. But look out there. There's nothing. It's still so dark. She was right. The sun hadn't risen. No cars had passed us by. Time felt like it wasn't moving at all. All we had was the darkness, the fear, and the shapes in the dark, watching us with their hungry, beady eyes. All we could do was sit and wait for them to finally decide to stop watching, and to make their move. And finally they did. I don't know how long we'd been sitting in the darkness. 6 hours, 12 hours, more. I don't know. Time blended together. All I know is that when it happened suddenly. 1 minute, all was silent. Then the next, chaos. One of the windows near the front of the bus shattered. I saw a shape tumble through the window, and then came the screaming. Several girls scrambled to get out of the way as the shape scrambled toward them in a flurry of darkened limbs. In the rush of movement to escape the creature, I saw one of the girls stumble and fall. Kelly, I think it was. I heard her scream as the shape bore down on her, only to see the shadow of Miss Evans dive in front of her. The shape crashed into her, and I heard Miss Evans let out a bone-chilling scream of agony as she was tackled to the ground. The shape tore into her, wrenching more ragged screams from her before dragging her toward the window where other shadows waited. All any of us could do was watch in horror as she was dragged out of the bus and into the darkness, leaving nothing but her dying sobs behind. Then came more shapes. Crawling, humanoid things skulking through the broken window. Hungry things. They shuffled toward us to drag us off to the same hellish fate as Miss Evans. I saw them grabbing another girl, who shrieked and struggled. Her friends tried to grab her, tried to pull her back to safety, but they couldn't. The shape was pulling her away. From the corner of my eye, I saw Amy racing to try and help her, trying to fight off the creatures. I couldn't just stand there and do nothing. I ran to Amy's side, grabbing the other girl, whose face I couldn't even make out in the darkness, and trying to pull her free. It did no good. More shapes crawled in through the window, more than happy to take all of us. I could still hear Miss Evans' screams in the distance. Proof that she was still alive, although judging by the sound of her, that was currently more of a curse than a blessing. I heard Amy scream as the creatures grabbed her. They must have caught her off guard, as they pulled her right off her feet, almost effortlessly dragging her to the window. Amy! I heard Rachel cry, as she scrambled after her girlfriend. The creatures were more than happy to take her as well, although she still tried to fight them off. Then came the light. It filled the bus so suddenly that it caught me off guard and blinded me. For a moment, I caught a glimpse of gray, almost leathery skin and bulbous pale eyes before hearing inhuman shrieks. The shadows scurried back, scrambling out of the light. I glanced over my shoulder to see Dolores beside us, holding up her phone's flashlight with wide, frantic eyes. The light. They were afraid of the light. The creatures retreated back toward the window, although I could still hear Amy screaming as they took her with them. Rachel wasted no time in sprinting after them. When they disappeared through the window, she did too, climbing over the seat and diving out into the darkness. I couldn't let her go alone. I traded a look with Dolores. Just a momentary look, but that told her everything she needed to know. "Everyone, get your flashlights on," she cried. "Now people, do it now." I saw Kelly going for her phone immediately. Her hands were shaking, but she turned her light on. Other girls did the same as I raced toward the window. For a moment, I hesitated, but I could see another light out there. Rachel's phone flashlight. I could see shapes around it. I couldn't leave her or Amy. I couldn't hear Miss Evans' ragged sobs in the distance anymore, and that silence filled me with purpose. I couldn't leave anyone out here. I couldn't. I reached for my phone, turned on my flashlight and threw myself out into the darkness. Barely even thinking, I charged toward Rachel's light. I could see her standing over Amy, wielding her flashlight like a meek weapon against snarling shapes that almost fully surrounded her. The moment they saw me coming, the shapes seemed to pull back further, afraid of the light we carried. "Come on," I said, putting a hand on Rachel's shoulder. She hastily coaxed Amy to her feet. I saw Amy instinctively going for her own phone, determined not to stay the helpless damsel in this situation. With 3 lights shining all around, the creatures retreated, doing everything they could to stay out of the light. We had an opening. The bus was almost fully illuminated by the other girls. It shone like a beacon, coaxing us back. I went first, leading the way with Rachel and Amy right behind me. We cut like a knife through the darkness back toward the bus. I saw the door opening. Dolores stood waiting for us, coaxing us back to safety. I could see the concern written all over her face. Come on," she murmured as we raced back onto the bus. She closed the door behind us. We were safe. Well, relatively safe. Amy and Rachel collapsed almost immediately, both of them nearly on the verge of tears as they pulled each other closer. I sank down into one of the bus seats, my heart racing in my chest. Dolores glanced out into the darkness, before looking over at me. "Jesus, didn't have it in you to keep out of trouble for 5 minutes, huh?" she asked. I got the feeling that she was trying to lighten the mood. I barely had it in me to respond to her. "Blame them," I panted, glancing out the window. I couldn't see the shapes in the darkness anymore, but I knew they were still out there. Dolores pulled me into a hug. After a moment, I finally managed to return it, and all was silent once again. The 30 minutes following our daring escape from the Whisper Men were mostly spent discussing how best to ration our phone batteries for maximum flashlight usage. We figured that we only needed a minimum of 1 or 2 on at a time to keep the bus lit. The girls with the most phone battery were the ones who ended up taking the first shift, while the rest of us turned our phones off entirely. And with the excitement over, we went back to waiting in that oppressive silence. Although with the threat of the light keeping the creatures at bay, we at least felt a little safer. A little. None of us really talked about what would happen when the phones died. It lingered in the back of our minds, but we just didn't want to think about it. We'd crossed that bridge when we came to it. I know I slept for a bit, but without my phone on it was hard to say exactly how long I slept for. When I woke up, I saw Rachel and Amy asleep beside each other in a nearby chair while Dolores watched the windows. I sat beside her for a bit, staring out into the darkness. Neither of us spoke. We just waited. And after a while, we finally saw the sky begin to grow brighter. Its hue shifted. A lighter shade of dark, then beautifully crimson, and finally, pink. The moment we saw the sun, I think we both felt a weight slew off of us. It was hard to say for sure, but this looked almost like an ending. We saw cars soon after the sun rose, and once we saw those, we knew that we were back. Wherever we'd been, we weren't there anymore. I turned my phone on again to check it. I had a signal again, and I wasn't the only one. I think it was Kelly who called for help first. She called for the police. They came. They asked their questions, but I'm really not sure if we were ever able to give them any satisfying answers. To be honest, most of what happened after day finally broke is a blur. All I know is that according to the police, our bus had been missing for an entire day. I think their official story became that we'd crashed somewhere on the highway and nobody had noticed us, but I know that's not true. Even if it was, it wouldn't explain what became of the bus driver or Miss Evans, both of whom were never found. I don't have any explanation for what did happen. I don't fully understand what we experienced out there. I don't think I ever will fully understand it. I don't think I want to. All I know is that it was real, and that those of us who survived will carry the fear of it in our hearts for the rest of our lives. Because of that, I don't think I'll find myself on the highway at night ever again, if I can help it. I don't think any of us will.